the extent of free will that we actually have is in 1983, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet and his team conducted a series of experiments that came to discover that there is brain activity showing intention to take an action several hundred milliseconds before we are consciously aware of the desire to take that action. And what that means is that our thoughts arise from our unconscious into our conscious awareness. We don't think our thoughts. And we know this already. We can all tell that this is the case. 60 to 80,000 thoughts every day we think. And so I've been puzzled about free will for quite a while, trying to understand whether it's real, how it comes into play, because it's been quite apparent to me that these thoughts arise from our unconscious. And because they do arise from our unconscious, they can only be from our past experiences, the things we've learned, our conditioning, our patterns, our traumas. All of these things leave an imprint in our psyche, and they influence the way that we see the world. So with all of these things arising, if we just act on them immediately, we're only reacting to our past. All of that comes from everything that happened to us. So, as I said, free will. I heard someone put it, and now I completely get it, which is that free will is not free choice. Will is around intention to action and the impulse to move forward. And so the extent of free will that we actually have is to be aware enough to recognize these impulses that arise and then question whether or not to act on them. That is the extent of free will that we have, because you can't know something that you don't know. And for you to have a different understanding than you do would require you to be a completely different person. And this is really important and really deserves some deep time to think about, because no matter whether your system goes about making decisions by analytically plotting everything out and weighing up the pros and cons and coming to the most logical decision possible, or you are the kind of person who just dives right in and makes the decision immediately in a second, right? Whatever way your system is constructed, it can only make the decision that it makes with the information it has available. So whatever way that you have of looking at the world, combined with whatever information is in front of you, your system will make the decision that it's going to make. Your free will that comes into play is whether or not you act on the impulse of that decision. And this can be positively or negatively. There might be an impulse that arises to give someone a compliment, and you might feel a little bit shy or embarrassed about that. But you can choose to act on that impulse, or you can choose to ignore that impulse. And likewise, it might be negative, in which case there might be an impulse to take out our anger on our kids, and we then have an opportunity to look at that impulse and decide whether or not we're going to act on it. So largely, your ability to do so comes down to your awareness that these impulses are only imprints from our past. They're not true, and they're not complete objective reality in this moment. Your strength and courage to act on an impulse that you might have fear and trauma wounds in relation to, and actually just slowing down enough to pay attention. You know, I said earlier that there's 60 to 80,000 thoughts that we have every day, and trying to be present enough to sit there and actually listen and pay attention to every single one is fucking hard. You know, it's like, that's the whole point of, you know, meditation and everything else. These are all practices to get us to slow down, to actually be able to make those calls in the moment. But when you start looking at things like this and being able to see that you only ever have this one choice, it becomes it becomes considerably easier, because you no longer have to burden yourself with worrying about making the wrong decision. You know, your system can only make the decision that it's configured to make. And so all you have to do is look at this impulse, decide whether or not that is going to improve your situation or not, and then choose whether or not to act. And so the way that I've been going about this is, seeing that anywhere that I can't be authentically myself is a wound, is some form of conditioning, is something I've picked up from my life where I felt like it's not acceptable to share my anger, or, you know, to offer a compliment sometimes, or whatever it might be. And so for me, really, it comes down to, if I can tune in the moment and there's an impulse there, it's like, is this impulse allowing me to be more authentic or not? And that is really acceptance of the reality that's in front of me. If I'm denying the reality, if I'm shying away from it, that's kind of like the marker for me. And so when I think about this, there's two parts in particular that I think are really powerful. And the first one is that you can reclaim a lot of the places where you shame yourself, because if you beat yourself up wishing that you were different than you are, like, it's impossible. And as I said, you'd have to be a different person to be able to think in a way differently than you do right now. And so if your life isn't functioning well, the best thing you can do is just slow right down as much as possible and just tune in every moment to see what impulses might be there. You know, if you can't even get out of bed, maybe you look for that impulse to turn over, to tidy your room, to not drink, you know, whatever it might be. Like, it's bringing our awareness down to this micro point, and then just deciding whether or not that one decision is better for us or worse for us. And if you just do that over and over again, just choose that from that impulse, whether it's better or worse, that will guide you to fucking places you couldn't even dream of, right? But it all comes down to that awareness. And the other side of it that I think is really important, that I just want to mention, is when we hold judgment towards other people for hurting us, because, as I said, people can't be different than they are, and that can be really hard to accept when people do things that really hurt us. But there's something in their past and in their system and in the way that their mind and everything is organized that has created an impulse within them to take that action that hurt you. I said earlier about, you know, parents who might take out their anger on their children. If we have more emotional pain than we can bear, our systems try to maintain equilibrium, and very often that can look like offloading that emotional energy onto other people. That doesn't mean it's right, but all that we really have that we can blame other people for because of this, because of what I've talked about, is that they weren't aware enough to be able to spot their impulses, or they weren't brave or courageous enough to be able to choose differently. You know, if a parent who, you know, took out their anger on their kids and is come home and they're feeling their own shame and their own stress and their own weight of everything, and the kid is running around and making a lot of noise, our subconscious will create a story of, well, that kid's making a lot of noise, they deserve my anger, right? But it's just a way of offloading that anger. And if you're not aware enough to realize that I'm carrying this anger and I'm trying to take it out on someone, it's going to happen unconsciously, and you'll feel justified in doing it largely. You might have a lot of shame afterwards, and you might have a lot of regret about that. But in that moment, there'll be a rationale that explains and justifies that. And so what I'm saying is that all that we can really blame people for who have hurt us is because they weren't aware enough and they weren't strong enough. And once you can really understand that, it will give you a little bit more grace to realise that they're just another fucked up human like the rest of us who can't sort their shit out. And, you know, these wounds run very deep throughout humanity, and it's going to take a lot of work to unpick them all and get us back to this place of equilibrium. But it really does start individually for each of us, looking at all the places that we do this, starting to reclaim our projections and slowing down enough to tune in to those micro decisions and actually decide whether or not that impulse is going to help us and take us forward, or if it's going to make our situations worse. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments if there's anything else you'd like me to talk about. Thanks. I'll see you soon.